When I was a child, I loved words. My sister often read books to me. My dad was a brilliant storyteller and would recite poetry. I made up endless stories and poems. At home, words sent my imagination racing and allowed me to escape. At school, they made me nervous. I hated the way I tripped over them when I had to read aloud in class, or how I couldn't work out how to spell the sounds in words. I didn't know I was dyslexic as a child, and like many dyslexics, I often felt frustrated and stupid because of my difficulties. So I wrote but never shared. Some years later, my creative path finally gave me the confidence to focus back on my love of words through my work with young people. It was then I went for a test that highlighted my weaknesses, but also my strengths. As a child who often felt not good enough, I never would have imagined that one day I would work creatively with words. Now I run creative writing groups and projects for young people. I wanted to make this film to bring together insights from dyslexic writers and wordsmiths about how they use words and what's important to them. There is still the perception that dyslexic people don't have the potential to master words. On the contrary, the wordsmiths in this film are testament to what we are capable of. But most importantly, I wanted to inspire dyslexics, young and old, never to believe that words don't belong to us.
My mother's stories and poetry, although she would never call herself a poet. She came from rural Jamaica, and she doesn't like me saying this, but she was semi-literate, you know. And most of the stories she knew, all the morals that she knew, the ethics was taught by poetry or rhyme or parables, biblical things.
I came from a very legal family, and so long words were used all the time. And I really loved them. I used to sort of collect them. I'd get a long word and I'd think, oh, that's fabulous.
My earliest memories are kind of trying to put together letters and going, does that make a word? And sort of like trying to work out what makes a word and what doesn't make a word.
Music and rap music, because of the rhythm and how catchy it was and easy to remember.
My earliest memories of enjoying words aren't actually my own, they're my mum's. She'd give me manuscripts of novels I'd apparently written when I was a kid.
Feeling them on my tongue, the way they kind of bounced and the way they made my face feel, and also their effect on other people.
Dyslexia affects around 6 million people in the UK. The condition occurs in people of all intellects and is genetic, so runs in families. A key feature in a dyslexia diagnosis is an inconsistency between a person's intellect and their performance in literacy-based tool use. Around 50% of dyslexics have other co-occurring learning difficulties, such as ADHD, Asperger's and dyspraxia. Some may also have a co-occurring visual problem that means words move around on the page, but this is not dyslexia. Dyslexia encompasses a sliding scale of difficulties rather than a one-size-fits-all condition. Some people will be mildly dyslexic, others will deal with significant challenges around literacy. As dyslexia affects the way information is processed and used, it can affect other areas of learning and life beyond literacy.
I just have no words to describe how much I disliked my schooling experience. I couldn't spell my name, which was Sarah. I had an H on it. They had little boots that weren't walking, and I could never work out if they went at the beginning of the word or the end of the word. And consequently, because I was slightly odd, I lived in my head, I told myself lots of stories, I was bullied, and I ended up being a sort of combination of bullied, expelled, bullied, expelled, bullied, expelled, and finally ending my time in a school for maladjusted children.
I felt absolutely stupid and inadequate but there was something inside me that knew that wasn't true. I didn't have an intelligence that you could measure and register on paper, but I knew I had an integrity, and I had a way of making connections that even the teachers couldn't see. And so I remember feeling stupid, but at the same time this kind of rather superior sense of injustice at the same time, and that came out in very creative ways.
When I first went into this field, which in 1978, my colleagues said I was mad, it was wacky. Only people who wore shorts and open-toed sandals in winter would study dyslexia. They thought in those days that dyslexia was a word that the middle classes used to excuse their children's stupidity, thickness and laziness, it didn't exist.
As well as the handicap, if you like, that I was getting because of being dyslexic, there was also racism going on, and so sometimes I wasn't sure which was which. You know, when the teacher called me dumb and told me to stand in the corner, was it? And you know, the teacher would say things like, "People in this country read like this" or something, and then I'd think, is it because I'm stupid or is it because I'm black?
I won't spell nothing proper or long. It's not that I couldn't spell, it's because I didn't have enough time to write it out fully, because I can't write as quick as other people. So the teacher would be talking, so I'd write it in text form so I understand what he was saying and I could still be on the same level as everybody else. But then that made me fail as well in school because it wasn't proper English.
At junior school I was actually told, I was told I can't read. I was told that it was actually physically impossible for me to read, something like that. And then I've read Harry Potter to prove them wrong. One of my teachers got really angry with me and was like, "We've been doing this for weeks. Why can't you do it?" And I was just like, "Well, I can't. It's not that I'm choosing to do the wrong thing. I'm not choosing to put bog instead of dog. It's just how it is." And in hindsight, it was probably like a really rubbish thing to get upset about. But when you were a kid, like I couldn't have been any older than 8. It was like the end of the world was coming.
Really what pushed me forward was working in theatre. I managed to get a first-class honours degree at art school, and then I won a major scholarship, an Arts Council scholarship, and I went to Newcastle and I worked in theatre up there for 2 years. In fact, I worked in theatre altogether for 15 years with some of the most amazing writers working in theatre at the time. And I don't think there's anything better for a writer, better than university, better than anything, than actually seeing a play die on stage and seeing an audience just go, you know, it's gold dust. Because books are so private, you never get to see with your written, or you know, your readership. You don't see whether they're dying. Whereas a play is there. There is no escaping for a writer to see exactly how his words are not hitting the mark.
It's not a case of, you know, how did you overcome the writing barrier to dyslexia? It's like, I'm really curious, and I think I was curious as a kid, and there's something that I want to understand, and there's something I want to know more about. And if writing and doing presentations and all those things are part of me understanding it, if they're the formalities, but in order for me to learn more about the thing that I really want to learn about, I'm gonna do them.
Belief is a really big thing, and my parents had that, my friends had that, and some teachers had that, and that's what motivated me to go on. I came to Hallam on an open day and fell in love with the place, and literally saw that there was a degree called creative writing. I was like, wow, let's go.
The weird thing is, you know, here I am struggling at school, and yet I love words. You know, I was the one in the playground that could entertain people by talking and telling stories and stuff like that. But as soon as I sat down behind a desk, I was disabled. When I really started expressing myself, it was as what we used to call a toaster. It's like a rapper, but like on reggae, on the sound systems. People used to say sometimes when I was growing up and I was beginning to do interviews and make a name for myself, "Oh, so you failed school?" And I would I started to wonder, wasn't it school that failed me?
Even though I knew I should have put more effort in school, the reason I didn't put any effort in is because I was falling behind, because I didn't understand the context of the questions.
Words meant that you went to university. Words meant that you started to see yourself differently. How did that happen?
My mentor still stayed in touch with me in school, even though I was past the high school stage. And I was getting pretty close to getting kicked out of sixth form. But then he told me to do this poetry thing to keep me focused. I met DJ Ibrahim and I'm like, I don't want to do poetry. Poetry is boring, it's dead people that talking about flowers and trees. Well, there's no trees where I'm from, it's all concrete, I can't connect to it. And she goes, well, what do you listen to? I'm like, oh, rap music. She goes, what does rap stand for? I'm like, oh, I don't know. She goes, it's rhythm and poetry. And then she played me Most Deaf Respiration. And she goes, that's poetry. Take away the music and read it to me. And she goes, see how it's describing the world around him. That's poetry right there. That's all it is a describing of expression. Good morning. Wake up another moment. Notice, palms cracked. My family's broken. I wonder when my mum's back. 'Cause my father is a joke thing. He's a clown in the making. That smile that being broke brings, see, I can't escape it. Like a caged bird with no ink, or a dyslexic trapped in a box with no time to think. What got me was these young authors it was kids, well not kids, sorry, young people trying to make a change in their community and trying to get heard. And I felt that there was no one doing that for my community in need, for the Bangladeshi community, because they were just all busy either doing drugs, selling drugs, or working in restaurants from the age of 13. I got to leave the country for the first time in my life, you know, to go to New York and compete for poetry. It just blew my mind, and I thought, it don't matter if I can't read or write properly, as long as I can read and write to some extent, and I know what I'm trying to say, that's fine.
When I went into theatre, I refused to tell anybody that I was dyslexic. And I thought it would sort of go away. And I did a show called The Good Woman of Szechuan, and we had to have a lot of Chinese writing. And I wanted to find someone in Newcastle who could do Chinese writing. And I had absolutely no joy. And finally, the chap who was doing the accounts called me in. He said, I think we may have found someone. I said, really? Who? Wow, that's amazing. You mean in Newcastle? Yep, we got them. You. I went, me? What? He said, I can't read any of your receipts. I can't even, you can't spell, you can't write. I mean, what? I can't read this. And I said, I'm dyslexic. And he said, oh my God, girl, you have got to tell people. And I think that is a big problem for dyslexic people. There is a great embarrassment about, well, there was back then. I think maybe it's going to alter with the technology that we have at our fingertips now, but there was then I was immensely embarrassed. I mean, my signature then was like a 5-year-old child. I was humiliated.
My last job, I didn't even mention it because there was a lot of letter writing and stuff. But now I've come across teachers that are dyslexic that teach English.
You disclosed it in your
yeah, I've told them, and they were happy with it. They're like, we don't see that as a disadvantage. Just because you find some aspects of learning difficult doesn't mean everything is going to be the same. So I've never felt discriminated against. I felt just embarrassed, but that's within my own self.
Yeah.
What else made me hide it as well? You know, on Facebook you get all these posts about grammars. It's your, not your, and all that. And that
I
just
hate that as
and
well.
it's just
really
they make it like it's the worst thing in the world, and it's like there's more stuff going on in the world than your bloody grammar. And if you understood it, stop being ass and just get on with it. You know what I mean.
I thought that doing a PhD on dyslexia, by the end of it, I would have a pretty good grasp of what dyslexia is and my conviction about it. And one of the things that really shook me the most was when I finished my PhD and I started learning Danish, and we got given this homework. And the homework, we had to listen to this recording of a very short piece of text, 20 lines, and we had to practice it for pronunciation, and then we had to go into class and then read it. And I read it, and the classic dyslexic things, you miss out the odd words, don't need all the words. Missed out some words, mispronouncing things. And at the end of it, the teacher had a real go at me for not practicing. And instead of going, hang on a minute, I practiced this, I missed out a few letters. I sort of like a 5-year-old, just sat there. There will always be part of me that has faced those teachers from a young age of telling me that the way that I do things and the way that I think and all those things is just not good enough.
Even though you are in an oral tradition, would you say generally as an art form there is a snobbery in terms of what that art form, what a master of words is?
Yes, often I'll go to literature festivals and people will say, can we buy your book? And I'll say, I don't have a book. And the reaction you get is, oh, well, never mind, you're telling your little stories then. And it's this, I don't know even if they mean to be that patronising. But if I turned around to Louis de Berny and go, are you writing your little stories down then? Can you imagine the sort of reaction I would get?
There is a group of people that think that poetry is something that's written in a kind of code for an elite, small group of people to read. And you have to have a particular type of education. You have to hang out with a certain group of people. And if you don't understand the code, and the code is a little bit like the Emperor's clothes, it doesn't really exist. But if you don't pretend to understand the code, then you're not clever enough, you're not educated enough. I've seen people do it on television when they talk about my work. I've seen people highbrow saying, well, it's just performance poetry. It's superficial. As if my feelings and emotions don't matter.
Some people would say, well, you're not a proper writer, you're not a proper word user if you're not bothering to make sure if you read lots and you've got, because there is a stereotype, isn't there, of a writer. What would you say to those people?
No, you can't tell someone that they're not a writer just because they don't read books. Why are you telling me I can be a poet when the first poet spoke? Like when I had my dyslexia test at uni, they were shocked that my general knowledge was so high. Like, how did you know all that? I'm like, haven't you heard of documentaries or,
You don't have to know certain people's names and to have the academic sort of pat on the back that some people feel.
There's enough laws in life to follow already, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to follow a rule for my expression. You're just telling me I'm only allowed to say certain stuff in a certain way or in a certain format? No. It's my writing. I can write the way I want to write. If Shakespeare didn't write the way he wrote, then there won't be no development in the English language.
The most significant issues for dyslexics when it comes to word use are detecting and manipulating the sounds in words. Basically, the neurological scissors that we use to cut words up are often blunt in dyslexics. As a result, retrieving words from our long-term memory is also an issue because of the messy way our brains store verbal information. Another big feature is a weakness in auditory short-term and working memory. That is, the ability to keep pockets of information, which may be word-based, on our immediate memory shelf, to then work with that information, for example in order to spell or sequence it in a written form. To add to the tangle, our processing speed is often a lot slower with this messy storing and retrieving of verbal information from memory. Regardless of this, dyslexia has no impact on our ability to think in words. So unsurprisingly, dyslexics often feel frustrated in that they can't always release the ideas and potential in their verbal thinking as quickly as non-dyslexics when it comes to writing and speech. But all is not lost. When the motivation is there, many dyslexics will find ways to overcome these difficulties through coping strategies, compensating, individual strengths, tenacity, and hard work.
if you're going to put it on a scale, the weight would come down heavier on the dyspraxic side. Like, I was really bad trying to ride a bike, and because dyspraxia, obviously, coordination, muscle memory, stuff like physical. And then with dyslexia, it's more along the lines of, some people say that words float across a page, whereas with me, they resonate at a very high frequency. And if I concentrate, they slow down. If I don't concentrate, they speed up. If you give me a yellow overlay, some yellow paper, a yellow Word document, I'm away and I'll go and I'll spell check along the way. But I still do miss stuff because it feels sometimes like my mind's running away from my body. So like, where both things are kind of like coming in together, my dyspraxia and my dyslexia are coming in, meeting in the middle, it's just like, wow, it's a bit of a mess sometimes.
What used to cause me real frustration is when I'm doing some creative writing and the ideas are coming really fast, but I can't write them down fast. So I kind of devised a little code for myself. It's just some words just have symbols, or they're just like, if I'm in a hurry, why would I want to write the word question? I just put a question mark.
With reading, I can't concentrate on the page for too long. It's just too dull for me. I don't know if and then I lose it, and then I have to keep going back, or I feel like I jump over lines and I can't keep track of lines. So that's what discourages me from reading.
I have a dyslexic font. I work double spacing and I work in colour. So I will start the morning in a dark blue. They're never very bright, but at least I've got some idea of where I am in the day. And then in the evening I will sort of sew the words together.
What happens with me is when I'm doing a public speech or something and I go for a word and it's not there, I just quickly find an alternative word. And I don't mind, using a whole sentence to compensate for that word.
If I'm in a stressful situation or a situation where I really need to be articulate, the exact words that I need to describe the thing that I want to say just goes. And so you're left there going, it's the...
Short-term memory and your processing speed will be affected by things like being tired, being poorly, being stressed, being hormonal. All of those sorts of things will just make the situation even worse. So there are some days when my adult students come in and they just can't do it. We're doing stuff that they've covered before, we're just quickly going over it, and they just can't do it.
The kinds of problems that I've talked about are at root sequencing problems. That is to say, being able to sequence letters and words visually, or sequence sounds when you hear them.
Is that the same with sequencing thoughts?
Absolutely, because what often is at the basis of thinking is your description of what you have in your mind in form of words. If you have those words all coming out in the wrong order, your ability to think logically is going to be compromised.
When I started my PhD, I kept a writing journal all the way through it, which I called the threads, because it's like you put all the beads on it, and with dyslexic thinking, it's kind of bits all over the place.
Way of being sequencing.
Yeah. So and when I first started writing my research journal, it was, if I look back at it now, it's really like it jumps. It's really, really jumpy from idea to idea. And as it developed, I found my own, maybe not conventional way of structuring it, but I developed a structure and a way of doing that which worked for me.
The novel I'm writing at the moment, I kind of wrote down a sequence of events, almost like a storyboard. As soon as I started writing, I had to abandon it, because as the creative process is starting, I'm getting more creative and I got more ideas coming in. I can't just dismiss them because they weren't in my original plan. And sometimes I start thinking ahead. I think, yeah, if I do this, I can change the ending.
I have a woman I work with a lot. She is my personal editor. And she is very, very good at keeping me on the track, and keeping me on, because my brain left to its own devices goes off into a trillion separate departments. But I've managed to train myself to be much more focused on what I want to do now. The more I write, the better I've got at seeing where I'm aiming my arrow. So I sort of, when I start a story, I sort of throw the arrow, and I know it's roughly going to hit that tree. It may not. It may end up to be a completely different ending, but at least I've got the arc of it before I start now.
Verbal reasoning is not necessarily a sequential kind of logic. Verbal reasoning means that let's say you hear the word dog. As a dyslexic, you're more likely to see all the characteristics of a dog almost at the same time. You see the colour, the tail, the four legs, the bark, etc., etc. You can use that semantic network, as it's called, to reason from one sort of idea, like a dog and a night, and you think of the dog barking in the night. I don't know if you've read that book.
I used to do this show, and I still do it every now and again. It's An Audience with Benjamin Zephaniah, and I just go on stage and talk about my life. And I start from when I was born, and then I shoot up to when I was 18, and then I go back to when I was 4, and then I can't just go, I was 1, and then I was 2, and then I was 3. I'm all over the place, and I tell the audience, this is not chronological. I'm going to go all over the place with this. I still manage to tell the story.
If you have a boring old brain like mine, and you work things out, A equals B, B equals C, C equals D, etc., then it takes you less time to do ordinary things, but it takes, you don't even see interesting connections that a dyslexic might see. You might go A equals Y, and then come back to B and go off to X, and you see much more interesting possibilities.
You said you were very visual, pictorial, 3D sort of thinker. Do you want to explain a little bit how that comes into your writing?
Okay, well, I tried it before, and somebody then said, what does she think? That nobody thinks in pictures? We all think in pictures. I don't doubt that for a minute, dear sir. But what I'd like to say about how I do it is that for me it is as real as you standing in this room. It is absolutely that real. I can move everything around. If I can't see the room, if I can't actually see what I'm writing about, and I have to have 70% of the image in my head, 30 would never work for me. I get very worried if I've got up to 30. I think, oh, no, I've got more research, I've got to get it up higher. And so in a way, I am seeing things absolutely able to sort of move it around. I can move it. So I come up with the images, and then I search the words, and the words become absolutely vital to sort of describe and to paint the landscape I'm now seeing.
Many dyslexics can see the three-dimensional form of an object from a two-dimensional drawing more easily than other people. That's because they could see the whole picture, as it were, rather than just the individual elements. An ordinary brain will just see, that the lines are going like this, and they can say, oh, well, this wall must be a corner just there, but they won't see the three-dimensionality of it, whereas a dyslexic can, or some dyslexic can.
And I'm connecting different ideas because they trigger different kind of visual ideas. So sometimes when I'm speaking, if there's no kind of the image isn't there, I'm not describing something, but sometimes those images come really clearly when people are talking. And I find this is quite a useful skill in teaching as well, because students will describe something and then I get the image of what they're trying to tell me, and then we can take it from, and then it's like, oh, right, okay, I think I can see what you're saying, and that's where that expression comes from, right? I can see what you're saying. And you see what they're trying to say, and then you start to create a dialogue with them, and you show them what you can see, and that helps people get their own perspective, I think.
I just want to clarify, so there's a visual seeing of all components, but there's also a thinking seeing of all components. Because I feel that very often, and I've heard a lot of dyslexics say this, that it's what we're saying about the bottleneck idea, that you have all these thoughts that are jumping, but they're all connecting and they all make sense, and there's some beautiful thinking going on. But when it comes to getting them out, you haven't got the speed that your brain has to get them down on paper.
Absolutely. And so you get them down in the wrong order. I mean, the classic thing is that I'm just at the moment editing the PhD thesis of one of my students who is dyslexic, and he has the most fantastic ideas, but he'll produce the conclusion before he gives you what he's actually done.
How are you able to retrieve all the stories in a different way every time without just going, oh my God, my mind's gone blank? How are you doing that?
It's so easy. I see it. It's as simple as that. I walk it and I see it, and when I'm telling a story, I'm getting out of the way of things. And there's a film called Finding Neverland with Johnny Depp, and when my son saw it, there's a sequence in it where the whole story is happening around them, and he said to me, that's how you see stories, isn't it? And I say, yeah, that's how I see the world, actually. So sometimes I will tangent and I will go, oh my goodness, that's over there, and look at that. But when I'm actually telling a story, because actually the story's doing that, this is happening, and then he's over there and he does that, and she meets him, and then they have to go on this journey and they're questing for that, and he feels like this. I can see it so clearly.
I love the movement. But in a way, that's how you're able to go back to them. And I see what you're saying about walking the story.
It's a journey.
You've left this scene over here, and you can turn around and revisit it and go,
Yes.
actually, I was over here for a bit.
Yes, because it's still there and it's absolutely real to me, and I can see it, and I. It's almost like putting a DVD in and it rolls out in 3D in front of me, and I just move around it and tell you. So when I tell a story, I just tell you what I see.
I think rhythm and tone is absolutely important. So I was on a train and with another writer, and he said, so what are you writing next? And I went, oh, I'm writing a novel. He said, well, what's it about? And I went, it's about da 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 dum bum 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 dee 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 do do da ba bu dum bum da 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 bum. And he went, oh. I said, yeah, that's what I've got to write. And it is, to me, if you can't hear the music of it, you can't hear the beat of it, don't bother with it, in my humble opinion. That's how I work. And it has to have the beat. I have to have the beat. And each book has its own rhythm.
I love the sound of words. There was one point in my life where my mother was almost going to send me to a child psychiatrist, because when other kids would be playing with Action Man and guns and stuff like that, I would be happy to sit in a corner and just play with words, which meant I would be regularly seen in a corner just going, yeah, rhythm, nice, and she thought I was cracking.
There's this beautiful rhythm with words. They have a length, and they pause, and they jump, and they hold back. It's like a dance.
It's just the format of the rhyme also helps it. Like there's a rhythm to it, which is easy to remember, because then you can just remember the melody that you were doing the poem in, and then the longer you do the melody for, the more the words start filling it out automatically in your head. It also helps with diction, to pronounce, and breathing as well.
One of the problems that many dyslexics with primarily auditory problems has is to be able to work out the order of sounds in a word, and indeed the order of words in a sentence. And one of the most important ways in which you do this is spotting the rhythm in a sentence. So if I say anti-disestablishmentarianism, there's a sort of rhythm to it. And what you're picking up is the increases in sound intensity, and also the changes in frequency of the sound, and that gives you a sort of what you might call a pulse to the sound, which you then pick up on. Now, if you're not good at that, which these auditory dyslexics are not, then you need to have that rhythm accentuated in order to pick it up. And what we've found, and others have found, is that if you teach that kind of dyslexic child rhythm, that helps them, because it generalizes from, banging a drum to actually being able to pick out the cadences in a sentence.
Interestingly, with numbers, I have to do them in a rhythm. So if I give my phone number out, it has to be, you know, in a certain rhythm. And if somebody repeats it back to me out of rhythm, I have to repeat it back again. Yeah, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? It's like, I know you probably got it right, but just check with me. Da, 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 da.
Yeah, exactly.
And if they do that rhythm wrong, I cannot recognise the sequence.
Absolutely. I mean, you're quite a confident person, you're a performance poet. How, you know, for me, I mean, I've got a really bad working and short-term memory, and I find it hard to retrieve things under stress, and these are sort of dyslexic things. How do you do that?
It's just knowing how to unlock your subconscious, like even trying to remember a line, it could be the slightest just touch on my hands for a movement that will bring that line back to me, because I remember rehearsing with that movement, the line.
Okay, so it's about movement.
Yeah, as well, so bang, I did my arm like that, and then I remember that I said I opened my arms to you in the poem, and then I'd hear that memory in my head, like I open, and then that will bring it back to me.
So do you feel that when you are able to move around freely, you can retrieve your own words better because you relate them to the movement?
Yeah, definitely. It feels like I'm pushing it or grabbing it back out of the air.
It's almost certain that speech came from gesture. In fact, we call speech sounds, the way they're made, we call them articulatory gestures. And there's a lot of evidence that this sort of hand gesture preceded speech. And if I'm talking to you and I'm not thinking about it, I will move my hands and you'll find I'm beating out a rhythm that goes along with my, I'm exaggerating now, goes along with my speech. And that's absolutely one of the ways in which you can teach children rhythm.
I find it difficult sometimes when I've got a flow of words and it's coming out, to get them out, because it's coming so quick. And this is obviously where we fall down as dyslexics. We can't pay attention to all the things we need to pay attention to, the written word, our spelling, punctuation and grammar, without it evaporating.
That's it. And I tend to physicalise it. So what I'll do is I'll start, when I'm trying to describe something, and I'll start to use my body, and I'll start saying that's there, and I'm turning and I'm moving and I'm plucking and I'm telling. It's something recently where I had to stand really still, and I actually found that it constrained not only my voice but the way I connected with things, because it was like somebody putting a straitjacket on my mind as well as my body. It was really odd.
Multisensory tuition has been found to be particularly, has been found to be essential for dyslexic children. And the way we are encouraging children to learn about sounds and letters is through a multisensory way. So we are always talking, looking, saying, doing. So we are supporting, we are making a stronger memory trace for something that we are teaching. But it's not only that multisensory element that's important. It is, like you say, it is that the overlearning. It is the ability to be able to go over something in a short, sharp, non-patronising way, so that information gets further and further towards that long-term permanent memory store. Different languages vary in how complex they are. And in terms of, the word is transparency. Some sounds, you hear a sound and there's only one way of spelling it. And that is a transparent language. And those languages, it's been shown, lots and lots of research has shown that they are easier to learn to read and write. Our language, English, for example, isn't a transparent language. It is really complex. So you hear a sound and there might be 8 different ways of spelling it. English is made up of about 140 different languages.
So that also will affect, obviously, things like the sounds and the silent letters.
Exactly, and pronunciations. And if you can teach children, dyslexic children in particular, the history, actually it makes it a little bit more logical.
What factors exist that you think mean that not many dyslexics would see themselves as able to become writers or try for a career?
Education, full stop. It's not teachers' fault. I have no quibble with teachers. They do their damnedest, they work very, very hard, and they have a rotten time of it all. And they're made into accountants and administrators, and it's wrong. But the notion is that unless you can spell Tuesday and Wednesday, you can't be a writer. And actually, it is nothing to do with spelling. And I say this to children a lot. I say, you know, look, you could swallow a dictionary. You could spell every word in the dictionary. It will not make you a writer. Being a writer is like having a voice. And a great voice just soars out. It just rises above everything else. And everyone just stops and goes, wow.
When I did my first book of poetry, I had to just dictate it to a friend who wrote it down for me. For me, the words come first. Later on, I learned how to write poetry down on a page. And even now, as a poet, I have to think a lot harder about how the poem sits on the page. I have no problem with how it sounds.
All the dyslexic people I've interviewed have talked about a love of words, and it's
Yeah.
an oral love to
Yeah.
start with
Yeah.
because of our difficulties. And I'm sort of making the assumption that dyslexics that have overcome have higher verbal reasoning. I don't know if
Yeah.
this is true.
You would
but
imagine that that was the case.
yeah,
Yes.
because that's what we're tapping into.
Yeah.
They've now sort of acknowledged that oracy, which they're calling speaking and listening now,
Mhm.
in schools improves literacy in young people.
Mhm.
But yeah, at the same time, we're hearing a lot of stuff recently about grammar being introduced very early. What do you think about that? And is there room for oracy, and should there be in schools?
How can you expect a child that hasn't taken part in debate and conversation, that hasn't been asked about their ideas, to have a balanced view and to be able to write a story? And I have this first-hand experience. A child that can tell stories, has listened to stories, that maybe has dyslexia but feels they can express themselves, has that vocabulary, is much less likely to have anger issues, management issues, because they can express themselves. There isn't that frustration.
Because of your experiences at Leeds Young Authors, how did school fail to bring them out in you?
It's because they didn't engage me more in lessons. If you want them to write about it, they have to be talking about it first. Like the whole education system is more about memorising than it is about actually understanding and arguing what you've learned. I feel that there is no space for arguing the curriculum, and I feel if there was, people like me who are dyslexic will understand it more, because then it's a debate and then we're seeing it from both sides, and a debate is always spoken out loud.
The ability to use oral culture and tell stories is primary. Then you can go on to the written, to grammar, to all of those things. But if you've got no bedrock, what's the point of learning grammar if you have no words to use grammar about? Sorry, I'm going off on one, but I feel so strongly about this. And Gove has taken it out the curriculum. It's not important. The man's an idiot. I'm sorry, I don't know if you can use that, but he's an idiot. Shouldn't be in charge of cycling proficiency, quite frankly.
Michael Gove, the Education Secretary, wants what he calls correct grammar taught in primary. What are your feelings on this?
They're totally I find it very hard to keep calm on that subject, because again, we are again to push all these children out. It's just going to become not even a stream, it's just going to become a trickle. And we're going to lose so much talent. I think, forget grammar. I mean, in a way, for me, I can't do grammar. I have no idea. I do slashes, I do full stops, I break it up like music, because I know how I want it to sound. Anyone can do grammar for me.
I was reading a Guardian article about the changes to GCSEs, and I read all of the comments because I was utterly baffled by the comments. Yeah. And it was basically the stuff that I thought, the sort of discrimination that I thought had been left in the 1950s. Yeah. It was saying stuff like, why should we dumb down exams for a few illiterates? Why should they get extra time on something? It showed two things. One, a complete lack of understanding of what dyslexia is, and two, I thought because you can't see that, whether you want to call it disability or not,
Yeah.
because you wouldn't say to a person who had no legs,
Exactly.
no, you can't go in that.
Exactly.
Exactly. You know, you're not allowed to do
Yeah.
that because
Yeah.
people. So there's, I think with dyslexia, because it's invisible.
Yeah, it's a hidden disability, and that does cause many problems because people don't appreciate the difficulties. And with the changes more recently in education, with this emphasis on spelling, grammar and punctuation from a very early age, that's, you know, I'm not saying to drop standards, but are you discriminating against a dyslexic child saying, you know, you're never going to get your English GCSE because you don't know how to use semicolons and apostrophes? You know, this child might be a very capable child who has the potential to go on to university, for example. But you've got to look at the entry requirements. You need your GCSE English and your GCSE Maths.
A child needs to be enabled to be creative with
Yeah,
writing,
yeah.
first and foremost.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
if they then feel, you know, if they enjoy words, if they like using words, the motivation to then learn the nuts and bolts
Yeah.
side of it is increased
Yeah,
dramatically.
exactly, which is why we say, just let them write. Don't worry, don't stop them and say, oh, you've spelt said wrong or you've missed a full stop. Just let them get their ideas down. So they develop this love of writing and confidence in writing, and then you can tweak later on. Or in some cases with a severely dyslexic child, you might not be able to improve the spelling and the punctuation, in which case you need to be looking at using speech recognition software. You know, there's been research and I've had loads of experience of this where children don't like writing because actually they've got fantastic ideas in their head, but they're being restricted.
I work with kids all the time, and it's boys and people that they go, oh, you know, he's not very good with his story writing skills. But if you ask them to tell you a story, their imagination is everywhere. Their vocabulary is everywhere because they have so much access to it. But they'll turn around and go, oh, miss, what I wanted to write there was fantabulous or dynamic or amazing, but I can't spell them, so I just put nice. And that kid is going to be marked on the fact that he doesn't have a vocabulary. Of course he has a vocabulary, but he's so terrified that he's going to get marked down that what it does, it shuts them up, it stops them talking, it takes that away from them.
And I think the other issue with formal education and school is that it's all about getting things right all the time, and creativity doesn't work like that. It's about exploring, making mistakes, problem solving, and not being afraid, not being anxious to go to stretch and learn in the way that a brain naturally wants to learn. And it's that restriction for a dyslexic person is hugely anxiety causing.
I know.
If our education system is rigid, you know, it can survive to a sense because it'll just churn out robots. But if you want to get creative people, you've got to be flexible. You've got to adopt. You've got to allow for people that are dyslexic and people who have different ways of looking at the world, and you've got to understand that that's all part of being human. You know, we can't all be the same.
And I think it comes from, let's have a more holistic approach to human beings. As we move into the 21st century, where we have three-dimensional TV, Kindles, we have Skyping, we have all of this open to us, we should teach our children, we should teach our youth how to access that. But we should not say, right, your personality, your job prospects, your exam results are going to be dictated by this piece of written text.
What do you feel like you want to impart to those kids that you're working with that were kind of you some years ago?
Don't listen to someone telling you that you're not smart because of a book. You cannot measure intelligence by books. You cannot measure intelligence by the number of words that you know, or the number of words, fancy words you can throw into a sentence to make you seem so much superior to everyone else. It doesn't matter. I say I'm dyslexic and I'm a poet, and then people are like, They open up and they want to listen to you and ask you what you got to say, because A dyslexic poet is unheard of. How do you write poetry if you're dyslexic? You can't read or write. But then you get an audience, and then you'll shock a lot of people, and they'll actually come up to you and ask you, did you write that? And I'd be like, no, I spent like 30 minutes of my day trying to memorize someone else's words who writes in street slang, you know.
So what you're saying is you're by being, you're changing perceptions.
Exactly.
What advice would you give to a young person who loves words but feels maybe up against it with their reading and writing?
There's help. Get it. Don't be put off. Believe in yourself. And accept that if you have dyslexia, don't rail against it. Accept it. That's who you are. It's part of who you are. Embrace it, because actually that will make your journey to find the door that you need to open a lot quicker.
I take in a lot of information on listening, audio, and it's everything to me. Library for the Blind is to be highly recommended. And then there's, audio.com, there's masses of things, libraries have audio. So in a way, there is a start.
With all things reading and writing, you focus on what it is that engages you, that thing that you think is interesting and playful and funny and curious, and you focus on that. And then when people give you advice, you take it on board and you think about what they're saying, but everyone's advice should just be feeding into what you're trying to do.
If you can find a way of writing that works for you, it may be unusual, it may be unconventional, as long as it's something you can come back to later and you can decipher, use that.
Use other languages in your poetry. Like, I like, if I'm talking about Islamic stuff, I'll use Arabic. If I'm talking about Hebrew, I'll use the Hebrew words. If I'm talking, obviously English is based off Greek and Latin, and most of it is still, I like to use the Latin roots of words and what their true definitions are, and I feel that helps.
If you're very visual, script is fantastic. It's hard work, but it's the most rewarding visually because you can see it.
There's so much things to worry about in life, or there's so much more fascinating things in life to concentrate on than your weaknesses, because then you're just going to be weak. You concentrate on your strengths and what makes your mind tick, and you'll see the world spin a lot faster. Follow your own path, do what you want to do, be the inspiration in your own life, be that ball of fire, be that sun in the sky, be whatever you want to be.
And never, ever feel you are foolish. Ever. I went back to my school after I'd been told that I would amount to nothing. And I said, as I walked into the room, to my head teacher, "Do you remember me?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, 15 years ago you told me I would amount to nothing. And tomorrow I perform solo at the Royal Festival Hall. I have my own company. I travel the world. And you're still here." And then I walked out without falling over and catching any article of clothing on the door handle, which is always a bonus.
The thing is just to keep writing, have a little book, and if you can't think of the words, maybe draw pictures, add the words together. Just invent.
I'd say don't worry about it, because you're going to have good ideas, and if you don't spell them right, then it doesn't matter, because you've got your whole life to correct them afterwards. And if you want to write something, don't feel like you've got to put something else because you don't want to say it, or you don't know how to spell it or write it. Just put it anyway, and it's not going to get you into trouble unless you tell yourself off for doing that, and you shouldn't tell yourself off.
Lily, that's the best advice I've heard, possibly more than all day, for a long, long time. Thank you very much for talking to me. Thank you.